Another one of FDR's contemporaries was Charles de Gaulle. I believe he's often really overlooked in history. He led the La Resistance, and after World War II, he founded the Fifth Republic, and he was, a mainstayer. And to his credit, he did try to really carve out an independent line for France against both the US and the Soviet Union. He was very critical of NATO and the EU, and he was pro the gold standard. But, as you mentioned, he got along with JFK, and yeah, I think he really was kind of screwed over during the whole Yalta conferences. But he really should be the big four, not the big three. What's your take on Charles de Gaulle?
Yeah, he was a great man. Franklin Roosevelt didn't want France in as part of the big. That was weird. Okay, I'm still there. Franklin Roosevelt didn't want France in as a leading country, shaping global policy for two reasons. One, I think that Charles de Gaulle didn't like Roosevelt, and Roosevelt didn't like de Gaulle. That's one thing to keep in mind. The reason why I think was there were, for any Shakespeare fans out there who've watched or watched the play or read the play Othello, there's a character named Iago who's always whispering, "Trusted, honest Iago. Everyone trusts Iago." But Iago is representing Venetian intelligence. They're actually the play is centered in Venice,
Mm.
and he's like whispering uh, little gossipy slanders in everybody's ear after he's profiled their weaknesses and prejudices and is just building and building these fictitious scenarios that don't really exist, but that he gets everyone inflamed, prejudices, jealousies, all sorts of things, to the point that he basically induces all of these otherwise good people to destroy each other. That there's a lesson Shakespeare wants the audience to walk away with. That should be a very clear lesson, especially when you read that play in tandem with The Merchant of Venice that he wrote in conjunction with that. Now, there were Iagos around de Gaulle and Iagos around Franklin Roosevelt, who I think were painting fallacious images of the other. And de Gaulle certainly gave off a certain arrogant demeanor. He did see himself as France, the embodiment of France. Roosevelt was a different characteristic, a different personality. He didn't really quite mesh with that sort of, bombastic, over the top, sort of loud character. He was a little bit more sort of like, he had a bit of a goofy spirit, a little bit more humble in that sense, but he made he was wise to the game. Both of them were able to sort of operate in very sophisticated environments but anyway, they didn't get each other while they were alive. The other thing was Roosevelt more broadly saw that the French were way too easy. They way too easily adapted to Nazism under the Pétain regime, and
Mhm.
he saw, like France is a deep-seated, serious deep state problem, that one couldn't simply just trust that institution, which at that time the OSS had a whole file, a dossier called the Synarchy, on the international synarchy, which was effectively by that time the the French centered banking complex and fascists that had been behind the growth again of fascism, working in tandem with their British and Italian and American counterparts. But there was a whole section of the French which were really messed up, and they continued on. I mean, this is the bane of de Gaulle's existence after he was elected president. Well, first he did hit the job like a good, Cincinnatus, the famous Roman general. He did his job, and once the war was won, he left his position to allow other people to lead it, and they led France right back into the grave. And so he realized, okay, to come back out of retirement, and he took the position again of the presidency, and did a good job, damn good, leading the Fifth Republic. But the OSS, the Organisation de l'Armée Secrète, the organization of the secret army, under Charles General Schall, who was a major fascist with all sorts of networks into the Nazi stay-behinds and Operation Gladio, were always there undermining different things that Charles de Gaulle was trying to do, especially after de Gaulle had announced that he was going to start supporting Algerian independence. This was like an unacceptable red line, and assassination attempt after assassination attempt was deployed. Many of them were found to have been directly sponsored and directed by the Organisation de l'Armée Secrète of Schall, and many others. Some of them were influenced or brought in things like Operation Permindex, the Permanent Industrial Exhibition, which had as a major influential player a figure named a Canadian named Major Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, who was a major player within the William Stevenson, the man called Intrepid, his intelligence complex. And it was basically a front. On the surface, it was a commercial operation to facilitate business and trade relations, along with another organization called the World Trade Organization as an international network. That they sort of dovetailed each other. A lot of similar directors in both. But in reality, when you look at what this thing did, it was a cover for an assassination bureau of Murder Inc. that had huge integration with the mafia, crime syndicates, drug money laundering, other things. Whitney Webb actually documents a lot of this stuff in her volume 1 and volume 2 of the One Nation Under Blackmail. I have it right over there. So if people want to but so Charles de Gaulle survived 30 assassination attempts. That's no small deal. And he kicked out NATO from France, because NATO was part of Operation Gladio that integrated Nazi and other Italian fascist stay-behinds into the post-World War II security apparatus. That was run out of a branch of NATO. Almost every single, I think up between 1949 and 1983, every single chief of Eastern European operations of NATO were all former Nazi SS officers. That wasn't just an anomaly. That was consistently. That was like 9 of them back to back. And Charles de Gaulle kicked NATO out of France. That was their headquarters originally, and they had to go to Brussels. He made sure that Britain was going to be kept out of the European Common Market that he wanted to set up with Adenauer of Germany, who we had a common agreement with that, Adenauer, Germany was a lot weaker because of what they were subjected to after World War II under Allen Dulles and the CIA. But despite that, Adenauer didn't want to sacrifice Germany any more than they've been sacrificed. He trusted de Gaulle a lot more than he trusted, the Churchill networks. And yeah, they had worked to try to create a viable economic system tied to silver, gold, other things. JFK was sort of moving in that orientation to interfacing with de Gaulle on numerous levels. So yeah, I mean, finally, there was a bit of a color revolution. I think more research has to be done. I've been able to infer through secondary, tertiary evidence that the overthrow of de Gaulle through the big, the summer of protest, summer of 68, 69 in France was coordinated by intelligence agencies. This was not an organic people's movement against tyranny. This was done kind of like a proto-color revolution, like we've seen them later on, and today in Iran or in various other countries. We saw it in the Arab Spring. We saw it in Georgia, Ukraine. The weaponization of confused plebeians, especially young people with a lot of energy, not a lot of mental powers or knowledge, who are turned into instruments to overthrow governments that are not cooperating with a globalized order of unipolarists. That's what happened to de Gaulle, and he died a year later. But despite that, yeah, his legacy is still, I think, very powerful. And anything viable within France today that could break free of this current death cult, managing, this transatlantic world order, is going to be in the genuine, authentic de Gaulle spirit being revived.
I've always said that Marie Le Pen party, ironically, started as the descendants of Vichy, but she owns the mainstream support and success into transforming the party into a goalist type of party. If you look at their policy positions, a lot of it's goalist. So it's anti-establishment, it's anti-globalist, it's anti-everything else. Yeah, de Gaulle can still be felt even today.
Sure. I mean, I'm as far as like Marine Le Pen and her party, I think are serving an important role currently at this phase in history. They need to sharpen up their understanding of political economy a lot more. But overall, for the anti-war front and a lot of other things, it is what de Gaulle would do and say if he were alive. On a principled level, I'm much more of a fan of Jacques Cheminade and Solidarité Progrès as like a more self-aware embodiment of the de Gaulle spirit. Um, but you know, there's a variety of incarnations
Mm.
that de Gaulle's uh, experience and life and courage have inspired in future generations. So that just needs to get tightened up across the board and turned into some active citizens movement as well, on top of a real policy that looks east, as de Gaulle looked east towards cooperation with Russia, with China, with other countries based on real win-win cooperation, also with Quebec. You know, de Gaulle had a whole plan to utilize le monde francophonie, the world of francophone communities, to break free of the shackles of the empire. And Quebec, where I live, played an important role at that time in that agenda too. So